Hello and welcome to everyone who is joining us at the Humans at Work podcast put out by Being More Human. Today we have a wonderful guest, Craig Gander from the Greater Bank, and Craig is going to be sharing a bit of the Greater Bank story around leadership and culture. Craig is joining us as one of the keynote speakers on the 28th of July at our Leadership and Culture Summit. The tickets are selling out quickly, so if you're interested in that, just jump on 3wsbeingmorehuman.com.au and check out the summit tickets. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle.
Could you start off by sharing a little bit about the Greater Bank for those people who don't know the business very well, maybe the size and scope, and then what your role is, please?
So Greater Bank is a customer-owned bank, so no shareholders, which makes a really big difference. You are working for customers, not shareholders. Primarily based here in the Hunter, with operations right throughout New South Wales and into southeast Queensland. 76 years proud, and as at 1st of March this year, part of NGM Group, alongside the Newcastle Permanent, which makes us, I think it's the second largest customer-owned bank in the country.
Exciting, and lots of work, no doubt, to merge two entities like that.
A huge amount of work bringing those two entities together, absolutely staggering, but the opportunity that merger has created is just phenomenal. To have a significant financial institution based here in the Hunter, the career opportunities, what it can do for the community, not being based in one of the big capital cities, it's a huge opportunity.
Excellent. So just to clarify, if you're listening, Craig is going to be sharing the story of the Greater Bank rather than the merged entity. So the leadership and culture story fits in that regard.
And NGM is, I think we're day 66, so it's a little bit too early to be sharing our culture story there yet. We don't even know what our culture is yet. But yeah, the Greater Bank culture story is one I've been working on for the last 7 years. So very, very interesting story through there as well, a lot of evolution.
Beautiful. So maybe if you can cast your mind back 7 years to the reasons why you engaged in this journey in the first place. What were some of the business challenges that you were feeling in order to pursue this?
We were very fortunate when I came on board. My interview process, I got to be interviewed in my second round by the CEO at the time, Scott Morgan. And it was one of the questions I asked him, which I wasn't expecting the best response. CEOs can be very hit and miss when you get asked the question around culture. But I didn't ask a culture question outright, but it was a question of culture. And I asked Scott at the time, I set up the scenario, I said, it's 10 years' time, you're moved on to bigger, better things, and your successor is sitting in the chair. And they're going through some challenges, but the thing is, they say to themselves, thank God Scott was here because he left this. What is your legacy? What is it that your successors will thank you for? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, the culture. That I've built a culture where people can get things done, they see opportunity, they are focused on the customers. That's what we're here to do. And at that point, I knew I wanted to work for this organisation. So it's been really positive to work with a CEO that fundamentally understood that his role was culture in amongst all the other things.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because 5 years ago, you could have got a CEO that had a very different view. And even boards 5-10 years ago, culture was being talked about and it was important, but nowhere near to the level that it is today. I think that it's enjoyed, quite a renaissance in terms of its importance.
Absolutely.
So for those listening who have never really understood the definition of culture, how would you define organisational culture?
We use the really simple one. It's just the way things are done around here. And then we put that into every context. So we have a phrase that gets used. We're a highly regulated industry, even more so since the Royal Commission into banking. But we put that into that context of saying, so when we look at risk, how do we do things? That is our culture, the way we approach stuff. When a customer walks in with a problem or an opportunity, the way we handle that. It's not about our products. It's not about our systems. It's the way we actually handle that interaction. That's our culture.
And I think, one of the things I love about culture is, you can replicate your technology, you can replicate your systems, but you can never replicate your culture or your people.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important as a lesson around culture.
Absolutely. And it's something that we've been talking to our employees and our managers for about 6 or 7 years, which is we talk about the surplus culture, which is in a world where everything is the same. Your competitors are the same, the customers are the same, your products, your systems. We basically have a surplus, certainly in Australia, we have a surplus of banks in it where they're all largely indistinguishable from each other. What's the thing that sets you apart? The one thing that they can't copy? It's your culture.
And so you say you've been working with this for about 7 years. So fast forward those 7 years for me now to where you are now. If you're looking back, share with us some of the business metrics that have changed as a result of your culture work.
It's an interesting one because I think, and I'll be talking about this on the 28th, we've been measuring culture every 2 years since I've been here. We made the shift to the HS tools 4 years ago in 2020, and we measured again last year. And I wouldn't say that, certainly in the 2020 culture survey, people found the results interesting, but they couldn't necessarily tie it to business results. And I think there was a lot of people kind of doing a lot of polite nodding, looking at the reports and hearing the stories about the measurement. But the 2022 survey was, I think, there was an absolute paradigm shift in a lot of our leaders and managers where they were seeing that connection to their part of the business. And we deliberately haven't tied it to specific organisational metrics. That was probably a little bit of a leap too far for a lot of our leaders. What we've focused on is tying it to individual business areas and their metrics, and it's the metrics that matter to them
in that area.
So constantly when we're debriefing results, getting them to go back and go, so how is that result that we've described in the culture assessment, that behaviour, how is that playing out for you in your part of the business? And they can often describe it in terms of the people. Oh yes, we see people doing that type of behaviour. But we've also now seen a few of them making that leap to go, and that's why I'm achieving that result. Or not achieving that result. That's the thing that's holding us back, or that's the thing that's compelling us and moving those metrics forward.
And I always talk about the culture lag with clients, because people jump in and they start working on their culture and they're thinking, we're going to change our business overnight. Well, that's not the way that it works. There is a culture lag, and human behaviour takes a while to catch up to what your intent is. And sometimes that while could be a 2 or 3 year period before you're seeing the results.
And I think one of the benefits that we saw in 2022, the retest from 2020 to 2022, was definitely true. So all our measures organisationally moved forward in that 2 year period, but not massively, except when we start drilling down into some of the more detailed reports. And we saw in some parts of the business an absolute massive shift in their culture from 2020 to 2022. And we've had a bit of an opportunity to delve into some of that. And we talk about the importance of leaders in that space. And every instance where we've seen a massive shift in their culture, we can tie that directly to the leaders in that area. Absolutely.
And that's another great thing to bring out in this conversation is culture is not all equal. There's not a culture. When we refer to a culture of an organisation, it's not even accurate, actually, because there's multiple cultures depending on leaders, depending on departments, functional units, etc.
And it's something talking to the board, certainly in 2020 when they had that, so what is our culture question? And the answer back to them was our culture is multiple cultures. We have cultures which could only be described as ideal. In terms of the OCI measure, it's a sea of blue. Measures where we had individual parts of the business where all 4 blue constructive styles were above the 75th percentile and virtually no red and green.
Wow, that's amazing.
And we had the exact opposite, where when you saw the report, the question quite facetiously was, did the printer run out of blue ink? And we had everything in between. Largely biased towards the constructive for the organisation. It is largely a constructive place. But to think that that's the experience of all employees in all parts of the business, that's where that being able to slice the data down to those more granular levels is really important, because there are parts of the business and employees that are not experiencing that.
Yeah, and I think, you guys are not in this situation, but I think if you're in a business where you're looking at scaling the business and scaling the culture, those are some really interesting challenges that you have to be able to grapple with and get your head around. And I don't think there is a more strategic topic than culture. That's why we've called this summit that we're putting on, Culture is the Strategy.
Absolutely.
Because we're not saying strategy is different to culture. We're saying if you're pursuing and heading toward a constructive culture, that is your strategy. Do you want to talk to that just briefly to wrap up?
Yeah, I think, people do try to treat culture as separately. And the analogy I've used with that is that's like trying to drive the two-wheel car. It's not even a three-wheel car. You've literally halved your ability to perform, and you're not going anywhere. You can really put your foot to the metal and probably move, but the effort to move that beast and achieve your strategy. I think one of the things that I've kept foremost for the last few years is for a couple of years there, PwC's annual CEO survey was highlighting that the number one thing keeping CEOs awake at night was the impact of their culture on strategy execution.
Interesting.
That the one thing, it wasn't about, there were certainly concerns around talent and not having the talent to do it. But the thing that they were putting down as the biggest inhibitor to achieving strategy was their culture. And I don't think, to one of the points you raised earlier, I don't think that level of awareness was out there amongst a lot of organisations 10 years ago of just how important culture is to achieving your strategy.
Yeah, and I think because it wasn't realised that culture actually is the facilitator of everything else.
Yeah.
I always think about culture as an umbrella. So if you imagine an umbrella going over the top of absolutely everything else that's in your business, that's a great way to visualise the impact that culture has, because everything is affected. Awesome. And if people are listening and they have done nothing with their organisational culture and they're wondering where to start, what words of wisdom would you give them just as we're wrapping?
Start simple. Start talking to leaders. Work on the leaders first. Find those leaders that get it, get some allies in the business, and work with those people that want to work with you on improving the culture. I think the tendency is for us to often to try and work on the hardest nuts first. And I just think that's an exercise in frustration. Everything is better when you're working with other people who are like-minded, which is, again, another great analogy of culture. So find the people that are going to be allies, get them on board, work with them, and share that load.
Awesome. And there's no better place to find your allies than at the Leadership and Culture Summit that's coming up on the 28th of July. So thank you so much, Craig. We really appreciate your words of wisdom and very much looking forward to your keynote on the 28th.
Equally so.
As mentioned earlier, if you'd like to grab your tickets, just head over to the Being More Human website and we will see you there on the 28th.